What if I told you that two of history's biggest revolutions were kicked off by the exact same idea, and that this idea was discovered by two thinkers who lived a century and basically a world apart? Well, that's the absolutely wild parallel in history we're jumping into today.
So let's get right into this mystery. You've got Dante Alighieri, the Italian poet, on one side, and on the other, Guru Nanak, the Indian mystic. I mean, on the surface, they couldn't be more different. We're talking 100 years and thousands of miles separating them. They definitely never read each other's work. So how on earth did they both end up fighting the powers that be using the exact same playbook?
All right, to really get this, we've got to jump in our time machine and head back to 14th century Italy. Now, this was a time when the Catholic Church was the undisputed heavyweight champ, and its worldview, which was pretty grim, held all the power.
And here you can see the huge clash of ideas that was happening. The dominant philosophy, which came from guys like St. Augustine, basically said that only the elites, the powerful, had a direct line to God. And get this, they taught that love was a dangerous, corrupting thing. But Dante comes along and just flips the whole thing on its head. He said, no way, the divine is inside all of us, and love isn't a sin, it's literally the language of God.
But here's the thing, an idea is one thing. Getting it to the people, that's where Dante's real genius was. He completely sidestepped the elites by writing his masterpiece, The Divine Comedy, not in Latin, the language of power, but in the everyday Tuscan dialect that people actually spoke. He was essentially hacking the system to get this message of empowerment straight to the masses.
Okay, now hold that thought about Dante, because we're going to jump across the globe and a century forward to 15th century India, because an almost identical spiritual revolution was kicking off, and one of its leaders was a mystic named Guru Nanak. And what's crazy is the setup in India was, well, it was strikingly similar. You had this super rigid Brahmanical system where all spiritual knowledge was locked up in the Sanskrit language, totally controlled by a priestly elite. But just like in Italy, a counter-movement was bubbling up, the Bhakti movement. And its message was that God is for everyone, and the path to him is through love, or bhakti.
And Guru Nanak, who was right at the heart of this movement, his strategy, it was a mirror image of Dante's. I mean, identical. He totally rejected the elite language of Sanskrit and instead preached in local languages like Punjabi. His teaching was that all the empty rituals meant nothing. The only true path to God was through love, devotion, and community. He was challenging the very foundation of religious power.
So let's just pause for a second and take this in. You've got two revolutionary figures from completely different cultures launching incredibly similar movements. And when you put their strategies next to each other, the similarities are just, they're too obvious to be a coincidence. It feels like we're looking at some kind of universal pattern.
I mean, just look at this side by side. It's incredible. They're both targeting the elite control systems, both using the local language to get their message out. And the core message for both? That love and community trump empty rituals every time. It's the same revolutionary playbook, just running on two different stages a century apart. And this brings us right to the big question. You know, like the source material says, it's kind of mystical. How can that happen? How did two people in such different worlds arrive at the exact same conclusion? Is it just a cosmic fluke, or is there something else going on here?
Well, maybe it's not magic. The source actually points to some really fascinating theories that go beyond mysticism and look at the deep patterns of human civilization itself. And there are a couple of really compelling ones to check out.
So theory number one is what you could call the societal mirror theory. The basic idea is that human societies, no matter where they pop up, tend to follow a similar script. They run into the same kinds of problems, and because of that, they independently come up with these same kinds of solutions.
And you see this play out in a cycle that just repeats throughout history. You know the drill. First, some elites grab all the power. Then, the regular people get pushed aside or exploited. That creates an opening, and a thinker emerges from the people. And finally, that thinker comes up with a powerful new idea that speaks directly to everyone who's been ignored. Dante and Guru Nanak, they fit this pattern perfectly.
But it's not just about social structures. Get this, geography itself might be a huge piece of the puzzle.
Think about it for a second. Italy, it's a peninsula, cut off from the rest of Europe by the Alps. India, it's a subcontinent, blocked off from Asia by the Himalayas. This isolation basically lets them cook up their own cultures in a sort of bubble, and while the details are unique, the underlying structure of their development ends up looking remarkably similar.
And that leads to this really big, powerful idea from the source. What if civilizations are like living things?
You know, like an organism. They're born, they grow up, they face challenges, and they follow a surprisingly predictable life cycle. And when you look back at history, you see it everywhere. Ancient Egypt, the Indus Valley, Rome, it's the same story over and over. They rise, they thrive, and eventually they fall. And they all face similar problems along the way, whether it's from the outside or from crumbling within. The problems seem to be universal. And maybe, just maybe, so are the human responses.
Okay, so if history really does rhyme, if civilizations follow these patterns, then you have to look at our own world and ask, what revolution is brewing for us right now?
So, where's the next Dante going to come from? The next Guru Nanak? Will their ideas be spiritual again? Political? Well, the source argues the next revolution is already happening, but it might not look like what we expect.
The thinking goes like this. Back in their day, the big power structure was religion, and the languages of power were Latin and Sanskrit. Today, you could argue the dominant system is global capitalism, and the new, challenging language of power is technology.
This means our next great thinkers might not be poets or mystics. They'll probably be AI scientists, bioengineers, and tech ethicists. The big debates of our time won't be about scripture. They'll be about algorithms, gene editing, and what it means to be human in an age of AI. And that leaves us with one last thought to chew on.
So, what you should take away from this is that the human drive for revolution, that need to challenge the way things are and imagine something better, that's a constant. It's always there. Only the language changes. And the real question for us is, who's speaking that new language today? Thanks for digging into this with me.